lots of energy, it sometimes feels like we can move mountains, right? However, when we don't have energy, when we may be feeling really exhausted, perhaps on the edges of our own burnout, then everything feels like a huge mountain, even when it isn't. So, David White, an Irish poet who I really find a lot of inspiration through his writings, speaks about exhaustion and his own experience of burnout. And in the poem called Sweet Darkness, and it opens with the line, "When your eyes are tired, the world is tired also." So I'm assuming that if you're here and giving one of your most valued resources, your time and your energy and your attention to this topic, you may be feeling somewhat tired or concerned about it, perhaps for a loved one. So, as David White says, it is time at that point to go into the dark, to go inward, and to ask questions that have no right to go away. So we're going to look at how we can find resources within ourselves. We have to, because we're nowhere near the end of this challenging time that we find ourselves in. And so we need to look at building and sustaining our resources so that if we do experience burnout, we are able to potentially bounce back. I've had experiences of getting to the edges of where I feel I'm capable of, and I've learned from those. So when we go through difficult times like deep, dark winters or dark nights of the soul, as Thomas Moore says, we can find and learn things about ourselves. So, really important to stay curious and, if possible, compassionate. Because right now, it's a bit like there's been a huge natural, well, there has been a natural disaster. There's been a global pandemic, right? But we're also trying to rebuild the damage inside and outside of our homes and our businesses and our communities. And there seems to be continuous natural disasters going on around us. So we have never experienced this kind of uncertainty and stress before. And a lot of what we're seeing is not just stress that's outward. We can see that in the workplace. When I look at trends around mental health and exhaustion, sure. But a lot of this is also invisible and inside. And so it's so important to be aware of yourself and your body. And how do you know when you're potentially getting to the edges of your capacity? Because the price we pay if we allow ourselves to get completely burnt out is huge. In fact, if we really all had burnt out, if we had the syndrome known as adrenal fatigue or collapse, we would probably be booked off into hospital with system failure. However, there's a path, right? There's a range, a spectrum. So being able to notice when your spark is starting to diminish is important. So, how do you do that? I mean, there's countless questionnaires, and you can go speak to a health practitioner who can help you to perhaps notice. But right now, you could ask yourself questions. I find what is helpful is to break it up into head, heart, body, and then soul or spirit or a greater sense of meaning and purpose. So starting with your body perhaps, because we know that our physical well-being is so important. If you notice changes in the way that you eat, the way that you sleep, your energy will likely go down, or you may even have periods of time where you're hyper energized and perhaps even can't actually stop and switch off, though those are all signs. Then also our emotional well-being. So if you notice, I tend to withdraw and isolate myself, and that becomes a bit of a red flag for me. You may notice that you're just melancholic and sad, or you have emotions in you that you don't even have words for. And I'm going to share some techniques on how we can process those in a way that's gentle and kind. And then, in terms of our mental or our head, that dimension of well being, you may notice that your memory changes, you can't switch off at night, you maybe struggle to think clearly, to keep big picture thinking, you may feel that potentially you're just overwhelmed and there's always so much to do. And once again, I'm going to share some tips that can help within the context of work and better managing our agendas. And then, in terms of your soul or your spirit or your sense of meaning, we can lose a sense of purpose. Now, all of these dimensions are important. And in one day, like right now, you could have had a great night's sleep. and you hydrated, you've only had one cup of coffee, so you're feeling really physically energized. You might have even gone for a long walk yesterday at the end of the day, but yet you could have a difficult conversation to have with a colleague, or there's something weighing on your heart. So emotionally, you may not be feeling that well. The key when it comes to well-being is in the word being, though. It's a way of being. So I'm going to share some theory with you, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on that because you can read up about burnout, and I'm going to share some resources as well. I want us to get into the practice, because you can read about driving a car, but I wouldn't get into a car with somebody who had only read a book about it and had no experience. So we need to learn how to do this, how to better navigate this journey of life, because we're always going to come across diversions and potential flooding in the road and directions that maybe don't work. So how do we choose to be, and how do we manage ourselves, head, heart, body, and soul, while we're driving, I guess, this car of life? And one thing that can help us, that I thought I would start with and remind you to become conscious of and aware of, and again at the end, I'll tie it into the exercise where we make a pledge, because I don't want you to just spend time and energy here and not do anything with the information. And I also don't want you to feel like, oh my goodness, there's just more, like this mountain's getting bigger. I don't have energy to do this. I'm going to ask you to think of one, at most two things that you're going to bring in. And if this is the one thing that you take with you, genius. The breath is a very powerful, not only indication of how well you are or potentially how stressed you're feeling, it's also a tool that can help regulate your nervous system. So when we're feeling potentially burnt out of control, overwhelmed, cynical, wanting to withdraw, feeling incredibly tired, struggling to switch off at night, the breath can help a lot. So right now, how is your breath? Perhaps you hadn't even thought about it yet today. Bring your awareness to your breath and simply notice. There's no right or wrong. Notice how you feel when you take an inhale. Are you breathing into your upper chest, perhaps around your shoulders? We tend to do that when we're stressed, and certainly when we sit for long periods of time and we stay constricted. And then notice your exhale. Is there some tension that you could relax, perhaps allowing your shoulders to drop towards the ground? I carry a lot of tension in my jaw, so I regularly, as I exhale, allow my jaw to relax. And I pepper that throughout the day, because I'm not talking about, when we experience fatigue and get to a point of burnout, sometimes we do need to book off and take long periods of time off. I've had clients that have had to take a month, sometimes 6 months. I know somebody who took over a year and a half to really bounce back. We don't want to get to that point. We want to be able to recharge, replenish, help ourselves daily. It's good to take time off on a weekend. It's good to sleep at night and get a good night's rest. But it's also important to, right now, when you're in a meeting, so to speak, on a webinar with a client, on the telephone, chatting to a colleague, to be able to regulate our nervous system, because we are so hyper aroused and it is exhausting, which is why we see the wonderful attendance for this topic today. So bring your awareness to your breath. And as we speak, I'm going to ask you in a few moments just to come back to that and share one or two breathing techniques that could help. Those of you that know me will know that I have a love of wine and champagne. My parents are from the Champagne region in France. And the last time I was in South Africa on a wine farm, I took this photograph. And what struck me about the photograph was the roses at the end of each row of vines. And one of the reasons why they're there is because they act as an alarm system, as red flags, so to speak, because the roses will get affected by certain mildew and bugs before the vine will. So the vineyard manager will be able to say, hang on, these roses aren't doing well. I need to pay attention. What are your roses? What are your red flags? How do you know when you need to start paying attention? Because a little bit of stress is okay, but none of us have got a little bit of stress. We are inundated and flooded with stress from the moment we open our eyes to sometimes even during sleep, if we're having fitful sleep and not being able to rest well. And as a quick recap, when we are triggered into anything stressful, so it could be the fact that you're trying to multitask at the moment, that can create stress because of something called dual interference dual task interference, which I'll speak about, and that interferes with brainwave activity. It could be because you're feeling exhausted, or you've got a huge to-do list, or there's deadlines, or there's a difficult personal situation going on. What happens is your body will respond by producing adrenaline and cortisol and countless other hormones that elevate your heart rate, that push blood away from your digestive system, that suppress your immunity, that get you ready to tackle that particular issue that's on your mind or heart or in front of you that you need to focus on. Now, if that is happening every 15 or 20 minutes, or even regularly every hour, you can see how that sense of hyperarousal can be very draining. And also, on a physiological point, it's pro-inflammatory. So it increases inflammation, which is why prolonged stress leads to all forms of dis-ease and disease. So how do we know the stress is here to stay. We need to look inward, and how do we make sure that we notice the signs, the roses, but also that we have strategies in place that help sustain us. And to tie in with nature and the seasons, I would like to use the seasons as an analogy for a 24-hour period. So there's an intelligence in nature, and nature is a very vital food group. This is perhaps the second point that I'd like you to take away with you. Is not only do you have the resources inside you, specifically with your breath, to help you notice what's happening with your nervous system and to help regulate it, but nature, the more time we can spend in nature, even if you don't understand how it works, we know that it does. The visual fractal patterns that we see in nature on plants and trees is very relaxing for the brain. The smells that you can perceive or perhaps not go right through to the hippocampus and help the memory center of the brain and soothe the nervous system. The colors are generally very pleasant. They're not these like technicolors type screen colors that we see that are exhausting and can cause eye strain. And generally, when we're in nature, we're walking, perhaps moving our limbs, we've got oxygen and blood flow, so all the senses are involved. So can you get nature as a medicine more daily? A question to ask yourself and stay curious about. And then when we look at nature and we see the seasons, spring, summer, autumn, or fall and winter, and we overlap that onto a 24-hour period, spring would be the moment you wake up to when you start engaging with the outside world through either WhatsApp, Telegram, email, work, news, social media, calls. So spring is that time in the morning. Then we have summer, which is our work day. And then at the end of the day where we transition, and I know that that line is very blurred, especially with remote working, that's where we have the wind down, just like we have autumn or fall, where the leaves gently start to die and fall down, the days get shorter, the nights get longer. We need a transition in order to relax so that when we get to winter, and winter is the time that you're in bed needing to sleep for 7 to 9 hours, that's almost like your time of hibernation. So let's start at the start of the day, which is as you wake up and become conscious. So you come out of dream space or sleep space, either with an alarm or with a child bouncing on you, or a dog or a cat wanting to go out, or an alarm, or a neighbor, as in my case. I have a neighbor that leaves exactly at 6:05 and makes quite a noisy exit. So he's my alarm. And then you have a choice, right, as you open your eyes. You have a choice to potentially reach out and engage with the device that's nearby. So there's a tip. Could you keep devices outside of the bedroom? And once you engage with the outside world, be it through messages, texts, WhatsApps, emails, you don't know what's coming at you, right? So you could have woken up feeling quite ready for the day. Low blood pressure, a good heart rate variability, hormonal balance, homeostasis, well rested, emotionally regulated through your dreams that you had. And then you don't quite give yourself a chance to stay in that beautiful neutral space. We end up then potentially getting triggered into the stress response, releasing adrenaline, corticosteroids, cortisone, and then we start that hyperarousal response. So how could you potentially make sure that at the start of your day, you are lingering in that very, almost what I would consider sacred space? And in that time, could you make time for you, for your well-being? Could you potentially spend time in nature? Could you potentially sit and do 5 minutes of mindfulness? And if I don't know what your home circumstance is like, and I know it can be very different, so maybe the mornings aren't a good time. But why I emphasize the morning is because once our day starts, and I know what it's like when you get pulled into everybody else's agendas, it is much more challenging to buy out the time to create homeostasis, neutrality, to bring down the sense of hyperarousal that we have, which is what leads us towards burnout. And now it could be as simple if you generally pick up your phone within 5 or 10 minutes. I would say start with lengthening that time by 5 minutes. If you could make it half an hour, perhaps even an hour, there's no definite time that seems to work. I think it depends on how much you put out in the rest of the day. But if you're working an 8, 9, 10, 12-hour day, I would definitely ask you to try and see how you could lengthen that time in the morning and bathe in that space where your body isn't supercharged. And it could start with simply having a cup of tea without your phone, looking out the window, and then going on with your day. So the World Health Organization has a definition for burnout that basically brings in three things. So we identify burnout through ineffectiveness. So you might notice through perhaps your mental faculty that you're forgetful about things. It takes you longer to do work that you generally would do a lot faster. Another part of the definition is a sense of cynicism. So this is related to your emotions and your heart, where you things that generally give you joy don't anymore. So you might have a sense of apathy or a loss of joie de vivre. And then, of course, there's the exhaustion component, feeling physically, emotionally, mentally very tired. And so, without going too much into the definition, how can we use the morning specifically to help mitigate that? So how could we shift from a sense of ineffective to perhaps feeling more inspired? Or from cynicism to being curious? Because when we're curious, we keep an open mindset. And curiosity simply starts with asking questions. And how could we better manage our energy so that we don't have to always feel exhausted? That we can actually have moments where we feel energized, and not because we've had 3 cups of coffee, but rather from an internal metabolic energy. So I've been doing this in the mornings is as I wake up, I don't get it right every day. It's taking a while to anchor it. I was actually thinking this morning that I should put a post-it note on my bedside table as a reminder. But what I encourage you to think about is as you wake up in the morning, could you ask yourself one of these 3 questions? You could do all 3 if you want to, but I find that when we try and do too much, we set ourselves up for failure, not success. So ask yourself, linger in that moment, even if it is just for 30 or 45 seconds, what is going to inspire me today? What am I curious about today? Or you could ask yourself, how am I going to sustain my energy? Because by bringing one or all of these components into your awareness, into your consciousness at the start of your day, you can potentially build awareness and behavior change later in the day. So I got this tip from a webinar through Action for Happiness. And a psychologist said it's really important to ask good questions at the start of our day. And I thought, well, these 3 might be useful because they tie in with the definition of burnout. So which one of those 3 before we move on? And this is useful if you want to make some notes for yourself or really commit to coming back and watching the recording, which I often do and I end up not doing because I have so many other things to do. But could you right now make a decision as to which question do you feel pulls you that you could consider asking yourself at the start of the day, knowing that you don't need to have the answer, right? When we ask the question, when we stay curious, we potentially open up to solutions and concepts that we may not have thought about ourselves. So what will inspire you? What will you stay curious about? And how will you sustain your energy? Because before you know it, you're going to be pulled into summer, right? So you're going to be buzzing around like a very busy bee, not only dealing with your own agendas, but potentially everybody else's. And I know clients, particularly in accounting, can be incredibly demanding. So what we now know, there's research that is showing that when we push through, when we do not take breaks, it does not serve us. So not only long term does it increase the stress response, the cortisol, the fatigue, and then potentially burnout, but in a matter of a couple of hours, it can negatively impact your brain. So some studies have shown, if you see the graph on the screen, the more orangey warm tones you see, the higher the stress levels. So they're looking at beta brainwave activity, which is an indication of stress. And the top row is where there were back-to-back meetings. So meeting 1 straight into meeting 2, into meeting 3, into meeting 4. And you can see there that actually the stress was cumulative. However, if we take micro breaks, so if we go from, rather than having just back-to-back meetings, so there's a graph there again that's showing the beta brainwave activity, and taking 5 to 10 minute breaks, what happens is immediately we can reduce the beta brainwave activity into more alpha, we have more heart coherence, and we pull ourselves out of that stress response, which is building up the battery, so to speak, rather than draining it. Now, I know you might be thinking, I don't know how I'm going to get through 10 client meetings and everything else a day without breaks. But if you are not managing your diary and your calendar, then your diary and your calendar will manage you. And ultimately, you're not serving not only yourself, but anybody else, especially later in the day, in the afternoon. So how can we practically make shifts to this and be conscious of the fact that we aren't light switches that just come on and off, that we are battery systems, that we are energy systems that we need to put back when we take out? So I have 3 suggestions that, if you aren't already doing, maybe something that you could think about doing is every 20 minutes. So if you've been on your screen now for 20 minutes, I encourage you to look away. So turn your eyes away from the screen for 20 seconds and look as far as you can. I mean, we call it the 20-20-20 guideline. So every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away for 20 seconds. And that helps to avoid eye strain, but also gives you a bit of a break and might make you aware of your posture, which we tend to constrict when we don't move a lot. And then another tip is to, every hour for 2 minutes, stretch and move. Even if you can't get away from your screen, at the very least, like at the moment I'm standing, so to alternate between sitting and standing, or to, if possible, have audio calls, not always use our cameras, because that's also quite exhausting. And if you do use cameras, to perhaps hide your self-view, because that's also been shown to help with reducing the fatigue that we can have from spending so much time on screens. So right now, actually, I give you full permission to stretch, to become aware of your breath. Did you stop being aware of your breath? Could you take a slightly deeper inhale, deeper into your belly, and as you exhale, become aware of any tension that you might be holding around your shoulders, your neck, and your jaw. And then the third tip is to have a 20-minute lunch break as a minimum. So the 20-20-20 rule, every 20 minutes, look 20 feet away. 2 minutes every hour, have a stretch, at least move your body. If you can step away, great. And then in the middle of your workday, if you are not able to stop and disengage and refuel and hydrate for 20 minutes, we need to really take a look at your diary and see how we can do that, because you will come back and potentially feel more energized in the afternoon. Because we can't all take siestas, right? But we can bring in these little mindfulness moments for microcharging, which we're seeing now. The research that's measuring heart rate variability and brainwave activity is showing that it benefits us, which means that by the end of the day, instead of finishing at 6 p.m. or 7 p.m., you could potentially finish at 5, because you've taken less time to get through all the work you had to, and cognitively you've stayed at your optimal performance. Here's another practical exercise that if you feel drawn to doing, you could also try. It's called the 5-4-3-2-1. And once again, just like driving a car, I invite you to actually do this with me. So we're going to start with our sense of sight. So I'd like you to notice 5 things that you can see. So look around the room that you're in. And if you're in the space that you generally work in, I hope that there are at least 5 things that make you feel good, that maybe even bring you joy, that might make you smile. And if they aren't, could you bring in some things into your space? Because a lot of us tend to just work with a desk, and maybe we're pushed up against a corner, and having something like, I've got a beautiful hand painted postcard over there. I've got a colorful elephant from my neighbor who did that. I generally keep flowers behind me because I look at my screen all day and then I see them. So look around and notice 5 things that spot joy for you. And if there aren't 5 things, maybe there's something you can stay curious about to bring in. Then I'd like you to notice 4 things that you can feel. So touch perhaps the coolness of the laptop or the keyboard or the hardness of the desk, or notice how your hands feel as they're falling on the top of your legs. Notice how the chair feels behind your buttocks or the ground beneath your feet. And why we're going through the senses, because when we come into the present moment with our senses, we're not worrying about the future or anxious about the past. And it's a way to help come into mindfulness without having to actually close our eyes and go and hum or say mantras. Then notice 3 things that you can hear, and try and move outside of your peripersonal space. So I just noticed that there's a machine that might be cutting trees outside the window. So increase your sense of expansion, because when we're stressed, we tend to also constrict and become very narrow in our focus. And then here, 2 things you can smell, but what I invite you to do is to use both your nostrils and take 2 nourishing deep breaths. Breathing deeply into your belly and slowing down the exhale. When you make your exhale longer than your inhale, very quickly, you can activate the rest and digest nervous system, so the parasympathetic nervous system, which helps to soothe the sense of burnout and exhaustion that we may be feeling. So second breath, deep breath in, and slow exhale. And then bring your awareness to your sense of taste and ask yourself, do you need to hydrate? Have you got any lingering, maybe coffee or tea in your mouth? Do you need to reach out and have a sip of water? Because that leads into basic things like hydration, which is important. So there's many things. And if you follow me on social media, I regularly post, like this is an example of a post that I put up, of these kind of practical things that we can bring into our routine to help. And you'll notice there, the last point, don't forget water, hydration, and oxygen. So hydration and breathing are fundamental things that we need to be doing. And I've got a framework called the Wellculator, which takes us through 10 physical things that we should be doing. I'm not going to go into it today. If you would like the Wellculator, you can find it on my website, and you're welcome to contact me. I can send you a PDF of the questions. And we should ideally have a score of 10 out of 10 on the Wellculator, because you don't need to do everything perfectly all the time, but you do need to be doing these things most of the time, because it's very hard to manage your emotions or to show up at your best mentally if you are dehydrated and your blood glucose levels are all over the show and you're not getting enough rest. So the Wellculator goes back to basics like strategic refueling. It asks about gut health. Do you eat like an artist? Are you hydrating? Are you rethinking other drinks? Are you keeping track of your health numbers? Are you making time for moments of mindfulness and rest? And are you moving your body? Which is why that suggestion to stretch for 2 minutes every hour and take a break at the middle of the day, if possible, is so important. And then when we get to the end of summer and we come into autumn, this is the transition into our evening. And this is the difficult time, right? Because most of us have got to-do lists that are never ending. And it is so important to be able to feel like we can actually stop, because there will always be something to do. Always a client to help out, or an email to respond to, or something to read, or documents to complete, or research to do. So when we get to our end of the day, and we need to really be clear on boundaries, because when we're working from home, which we will be for the foreseeable future, we're definitely going to see a hybrid of remote and going back to the office. We need to be, I've had to almost treat myself like a child. So I've had to physically really implant rituals, such as switching off my laptop and my monitor, even if I know I'm potentially going to come back and do personal things like looking for research or watching Netflix, the act of switching it off helps me to wind down. I also have a separate room that I work in, so closing the door, for instance, writing out a list of what I've done and what I will do the next day helps me to have the sense of that I've done enough. I have so many clients that have shared ideas of how they've brought in make-believe commutes to help with the transition, because we used to have very powerful transitions at the end of our day. We would leave the office, we would say goodbye to colleagues, we would potentially drive or catch transport, we would go past the gym or the pub or the grocery store on the way home, we would walk through our front door and have fur children and children and greet us. So there were lots of signs and triggers that we are transitioning into a different time of day. When was the last time you had those kind of transitions? And even if you are leaving the office because you're working somewhere and coming home, sometimes, we're bringing work back with us and then working again later in the evening. So how do you know that you've done enough? So if you look at the chap there on the left, and in a moment I'm going to show you a lady on the right, what words would you use to describe how he's feeling? So you might come up with, I don't know, you may think of frustrated, exhausted, tired, maybe burnt out. And then if we look at the lady on the right, what words would you use to describe how she's feeling? Here you may, I don't know, I'd say serene, calm, at peace. And I'm assuming that you would rather be feeling more of the words that I described latter rather than the former. So how do we do that, knowing that potentially we've never done enough? There's a technique that I learned while doing improvisation, comedy improv, and it's now also a tool used in emotional resilience. And it's called the genius of and. The genius of and. And what it does is it helps us to be able to hold polarity, which is a very vital skill if you want to build fortitude and resilience, especially in terms of managing difficult times and challenges. So what it means is you acknowledge that you're having a negative thought about something, the fact that you may not have done enough, that you're feeling overwhelmed, that you're exhausted, or that there's a difficult personal issue, and you name it. Then, very important, you say the word and, because and provides the bridge. Then you state something that is a little bit more positive than what you just said. I'm not saying Disneyland fairy tale, like I'm exhausted and I want to run a marathon. What would be more realistic is I am feeling exhausted and I know that I can rest tonight and maybe feel better tomorrow morning. So this practice takes practice. I have sometimes, when I've had a very difficult situation, like in the beginning of the year when my flight to South Africa was cancelled yet again, and I was not able to see my parents and help them with their move and some other big things, as many of us have had, I did this exercise for a few days. I would state the negative, my flight has been cancelled to South Africa, I can't get to South Africa, and I would slowly then mention positive things that would create a bridge towards me reframing the negative situation. In that case, it took about 3 or 4 days, and I got to a place of acceptance. And actually, in that process, I discovered something I had not thought about that really has helped me to see a silver lining in that. The more you practice this, the faster it happens. Yesterday, I did this technique in the moment. So what happened was Teams, I was running a 3.5 hour leadership program, and Teams was everything that could have gone wrong on Teams went wrong. And I said to myself, when I was kicked off the call for the second time for no apparent reason, I have been kicked off this call and I can still breathe. So I kept going back to my breath and deep breathing. And in the end, it worked out. And I finished the session feeling calm Had I not done that, I potentially could have been incredibly frazzled, spoken really quickly, because when you're full of adrenaline, we know that it impacts all our faculties and get pulled into the stress response. So perhaps the genius of and is an exercise that you could try. And then thinking of this transition at the end of the day is to build in rituals. Now, rituals need anchors and repetition. So I don't know, what might work for you is listening to a piece of music all the time. I have a particular song that I like to play at the end of the day, that now that I've done it several times, dozens of times, my body automatically relaxes even within a few seconds of that tune playing. There are many things that you can do to help at the end of the day to transition. Exercise of any kind, even if it is just a walk around the block. Could you perhaps have a book that's non-work related that you sit and read for 2, 3, 4, 5 minutes to help you transition? And then what's also important is to think about what's bringing us joy. Because when we're feeling depleted and tired and burnt out, we can't always change our situation. We can't maybe find ways to work less. And the concept of having lots of breaks in the day is just too much. How could you then look at bringing in joy, bringing in places of art and creativity that do refuel us, that we need? So there are two psychologists that have put together something called the Healthy Mind Platter. And I find the more I do work around these 7 ingredients, the more I realize they really are important for mental well-being. And we're not going to look at all 7. I just wanted to highlight one of them. Some of them you'll recognize, like we need to have sleep. We need to be physically active. I've spoken about that. We need to, when we have focus time, is avoid distractions so we're able to actually get more done. And I shared with you techniques of having regular breaks around that, and avoiding distractions can help. But you may notice the green little ingredient on that platter, which is called playtime. Now, children do this well. Animals and our pets do this well. But what about you? Play is incredibly important in terms of helping us manage stress, because it teaches us to respond in unknown situations. It releases dopamine that helps with the layering of new neural pathways and memory consolidation. So there's so many benefits to bringing in play. Now, play is personal. Play for me is building a jigsaw puzzle. I don't have kids. If I did, I would play with kids. If I had pets, I guess hanging out with pets would do that. But play is where you do an activity that brings you a sense of joy, that has no particular outcome, that allows for spontaneity. So when was the last time you would say you felt a sense of joy or playfulness? And if it was within the last 24 hours, amazing. Perhaps then as a community, we need to share how we're managing to play. So there's a lovely resource, which Mark, I've actually forgotten to be nudging you to share the resources, but the resource by Brene Brown, she did a podcast where she spoke about the benefits of play and how it helps with innovation and creativity. And as a family, what they did is they wrote down each of them wrote down a list of what makes them feel playful, and then they found what overlapped, and they committed to once a week doing an activity from that overlapping of play activity. And then the last season, which is the season of winter, which is when we actually go to sleep at night. If we have started our day and allowed ourselves not to be so hyper aroused, if we've brought in micro breaks during the day to recharge, if we're using the breath and mindfulness techniques to be able to stay in the present moment, if we're conscious about how we're getting the basic fundamental things right, like in the Wellculator, and if we've transitioned at the end of the day, we've given ourselves an hour without digital screen time. We've allowed ourselves to bring in hobbies and things that bring us joy, not just on vacation or holiday once or twice a year, but almost on a daily basis. Then when we go to bed and put our head on the pillow, it may be easier to drop off into deep restorative sleep. And if you would like more insights into how you can ensure your bedroom is correct for sleep, and if you'd like more insights into how to wind down, I know that with Simon, thank you, one of the presentations we did was on this topic of sleep. So I'm sure that that recording is available. And there's also a sleep and rest guide that I've got available on my website. We've covered quite a bit of ground. And so before I move into asking you what your personal pledge is going to be, I'd like to remind you once again to bring your awareness to your breath. So notice your inhale and notice your exhale. Could you breathe a little bit deeper on your next inhale? And as you exhale, can you lengthen your exhale and allow your shoulders to drop a little bit more to the ground, perhaps releasing tension in your jaw, allow your tongue to drop to the bottom of your mouth. And also what's quite powerful with the breath, with the inhale and the exhale, is we can use it as an anchor for asking ourselves, what do I need to breathe into my life? What do I need more of? And trust that your intuition knows what you need. And what do I potentially need to let go of? So when we exhale, we let go of toxins and carbon dioxide. So figuratively, what do you need to breathe out, to let go of? It's a beautiful expression. When you're brave enough to say goodbye to something, to let it go, often life will reward you with a new hello. I have that consistently with relationships, with work. When I choose no longer to do something that feels draining, I'll find a solution or an opportunity will come up. But based on what we've spoken about and shared, I'd like you to think about two things that you're going to take away with you. Firstly, what is something that you need more of? So as you breathe in, as you inhale, what do you need more of? What do you need to say yes to? And trust that what comes up is what you need right now. Is it more time for you in the morning? Is it more breaks in the day? Is it a better transition at the end of the evening? And then also a second thing, as you exhale, what do you need less of? What do you need to let go of, or to say no to? Where do you maybe need a clearer boundary? Do you need to say no to alcohol on weeknights? Do you need to say no to staying up till 11 or 12 p.m. watching Netflix? Do you need to say no to a particular client? So those are at most two things that I'd like you to take from today. Is what is something that you feel you need to breathe into your life, and what is something that you feel you need to let go? And I would recommend, you're welcome to reach out to me and to share your personal pledges, because there's in public declaration or in sharing it or writing it down or telling somebody, we can create a sense of accountability and then also get support. We need to help one another. We can't do this alone. Alone is hard. Together is so much easier. And when we start by doing small, little things, not big things, we don't want to move the mountains. We just want to take a step up the mountain. When we start by doing what we need to do, hydrating, going to bed a bit earlier, creating better boundaries, then we're doing something that's possible. And before we know it, we look back and we've done what seemed to be the impossible. So I'm going to end on that note and just say thank you for being here, for giving us your attention, and to Simon as well. And I'll share contact details where you can reach out to me, because I would really love to be able to continue to support you.
That's brilliant, Celynn. And your contact details are in the chat box. So if anybody would like to reach out and have a conversation or a further conversation with Celynn, then just click on the links and that will tell you what to do. Just before we move on to the questions, I just wondered whether it would be useful, Celynn, if we could encourage people to post their personal pledges in the chat box.
Yes.
Yeah, because if you're going to commit to doing something as a result of being in the conversation today, if you could put it in the chat box for me, that would be great. And also it gives other people an opportunity. You might inspire somebody else to do something similar to yourself if they're struggling with stuff that they want to do. I know I've got a page full of notes at the bottom here of stuff that I'm going to do, Celynn. So thank you. And if you've got any questions, I've got some questions of my own, and there's some questions that we've got before we started. But if you've got any questions, you pop them in the Q&A box. We will gladly ask them, and as I say, pop the pledges in the chat box as well. So Celynn, the first thing, when you was talking about moving from winter into spring at the beginning of the day, not touching your phone or connecting with the world for a period of time, that brought up some anxiety for me. So my morning routine, generally speaking, is the alarm clock goes off at 5:30. and I don't touch the phone, but I get up, I have a shower and whatnot, get dressed, and then go downstairs. And as I go downstairs, it's almost certainly the first thing that I do before I eat, or I rehydrate a bit because I take water upstairs. But one of the reasons why I check that is because I want to see what's going on in the world, whether anybody's emailed me overnight or WhatsApp me overnight. I could also justify it by saying that loved ones haven't contacted me because there's been an emergency and all that sort of stuff. So what can I do to help deal with that anxiety if I'm going to delay? And I'm conscious of my language there. So if I'm going to delay looking for, say, 15 to 30 minutes.
Once we have a strong enough reason why, we will find a how. So what is your why for creating half an hour of not looking at the news or checking emails?
Well, I
Why?
look that when you was talking about the me time, that for me, the kids are in bed generally speaking. Sally's still in bed at that point, so it's my time. It's the ideal opportunity for me time. So whether that's sitting outside, reconnecting with myself, thinking about what it is that I want to achieve during the course of the day, how I could serve my customers better. It's that kind of thing that I would like to be doing.
That feels like quite a compelling thing to do. So perhaps it's about that. It's about saying, all right, I'm going to make a cup of tea, and for 5 minutes, or as long as it takes to drink the cup of tea, I will do strategic big picture thinking. So that ties in with those questions. What will inspire me today? What am I curious about? And you could ask those questions relating to the business. So even though you're thinking about the business, but you're not getting pulled into somebody's crisis that happened overnight. And chances are you're not going to drop any balls because we're just talking about 5 or 10 minutes, right? And if you wanted to, I, for instance, want to perfect my French. So I've started reading a French book out loud in the morning over my cup of tea or coffee. And I feel incredible on the days that I do that. I didn't do it today because I got up and I felt like I wanted to prepare some more for this. And I noticed that I feel good on those days when I've given myself the chance to read a bit of French. So I show up better. I'm happier, more joyful. So it's personal what you want to do in that time. But I think, Simon, you understand why it's good for you. And I'd focus on that and start with a small amount of time, not half an hour. Build it up slowly.
Excellent, thank you. And the question for me was around curiosity. So, what am I curious about? I found that really interesting because that could be all sorts of different. I could apply mentally for me. I could apply that to all sorts of different scenarios. And then the other one for me that I really liked was playing the music at the beginning and the end of the day. And I hadn't until you started talking about the commute and all the different things that commute involved. For me, it was just I got in the car and I drove home, but I didn't. I said goodbye. There was a route, and like you come into the house, you put your bag
Yeah,
there, and all
yeah,
those.
yeah.
I wasn't even aware, conscious of that routine. So one of my actions is going to be to get clarity over that final part of the day, and even saying goodbye to people or good night to people when I leave. So thank you for that. So we've got lots of things. Sorry, Celynn, did you want to add
I
something onto
did. I
that?
did.
Yeah,
I
go on
actually
then.
forgot. I've got a buddy in South Africa, and we check in with each other at the end of the day. So she's 1 hour ahead of me. So now, and so it might help to also have a buddy that you can end your day with. You've got that accountability. Like, yeah, I've stopped. Oh, have you stopped? No, I'm still answering emails. Well, like, you've got 5 minutes and then stop. So having that accountability.
Brilliant. Thank you. We got lots of pledges coming through
And so,
on the chat box. So thank you very much for that. So some questions, Celynn. There's a couple of questions around how we can help other people do this. So at the moment, obviously, we've got team members and they're working from home. How can we help them manage their burnout and their work life balance?
yeah, it's challenging because it's personal, very personal, right? Start with you. So as a leader, your energy and your behaviors are contagious. If you're not giving yourself permission to take rests and sending emails at like 5:30 in the morning, or then what kind of example are you setting? So start with you. And then I think it all starts with awareness and education, is helping people understand that the way they're feeling may not be normal, because a lot of us are getting to a point after 12 months of getting used to this high intensity and high stress that we're desensitized. Like, we don't know what it's like to feel fully relaxed and playful. I mean, we haven't even been on holiday for 12 months, so we haven't been able to feel that. So I'm definitely building in well-being as part of your culture, but that's a whole different conversation that we can always have is, and it starts with, yeah, it starts with culture. How are meetings? Give people permission to stop 5 minutes before the hour. Encourage nobody to maybe to have a meeting over lunch. There's so many things we could be doing.
Excellent. Thank you. And obviously they could watch this recording, so we can share that. You can share
Yes.
this recording with the team to
Yeah.
give them some ideas around how they could help themselves. So thank you. What is the one thing that I should do every day to reset my mindset?
The father of positive psychology, Dr. Martin Seligman, says that humans need solitude and stillness to flourish. I would spend a few minutes in solitude and stillness and use your breath as an anchor.
Brilliant. Thank you. And then Isaac's asked, I feel like I'm constantly moving from one deadline to the next with no time to regroup. Do you have any advice for dealing with this?
Yes, manage your breath, first of all, because those transitions from tasks and meetings we saw in that graph can be very stressful and can increase the cumulative effect of stress and beta brainwave activity. So use techniques while you're working and managing the deadlines, like the breath, like hydrating, standing and moving your body, because motion shifts emotion, for instance. And at some point, you have to take back control in small ways. And if you really can't, then look at when you aren't meeting deadlines on a Sunday, what are you doing to replenish your will? Is it quality activity and food that you're putting in, or is it maybe junk food, junk information? Because then that's just adding to a bigger problem.
Thank you. And then the last one, which is a bit of a flip on it. So how do I improve my focus when working from home? So I know that there's lots of things that I could get distracted with whilst I'm here washing up and washing and cutting the lawn. There's a whole world of stuff that I wouldn't even dream of doing normally. So do you have any tips as to how I can focus or work more effectively at home?
Well, I think just like you would create boundaries and say, well, I'm now done with work and I'm going to do home life and those kind of chores, is to say, well, even though I'm home and I could distract with that and notice that procrastination, is to say I'm going to commit and work in certain time slots that work for you. I notice I work well in 90-minute time slots. Some people use 45 minutes. Some people use the Pomodoro, which is 25-minute bursts. And you set an alarm, but then you must take a break after that, even if it is just a micro minute, and then come back. And then there's a concept called flow. And when we tap into a state of flow, we are 500% more creative and productive. And flow doesn't happen when you're doing three or four different things at the same time. So if you've got Teams meetings open, Slack channel, WhatsApp, and emails, when you multitask, you lose cognitive function because every single task takes a little bit of a different brain function, and we have what we call dual task interference. So for important work, shut distractions, focus, and just do email or just do the contract or just do that piece of work for the client.
Brilliant. Excellent. Thank you. So they're all the questions that I've got in the system. So we'll just have a quick wrap up. And if anybody's got any questions at all, they pop them in the Q&A box quickly and we'll gladly answer them. Phil has asked, Phil's asked, or Emma's asked for Phil in the chat box. I used to be a beekeeper once upon a time. I used to keep bees. I let the bees go. I sold the bees about 3 years ago now because it wasn't work. I was finding them more of an aggravation than the joy that I was getting out of them. But I do still think about the bees quite a bit, especially when outside the front door we've got some heather, and when that's in flower, it's covered with honeybees. So I haven't got the bees any longer. So, Celynn, just to finish off, is there anything else that you would like to share? Perhaps, Mark, you could pop the contact. Brilliant, Mark. Great minds think alike. I understand now. Phil's piggybacked on somebody else's login, so that's cleared that up. And Mark's just posted the contact details in the chat box. So, if anybody wants to get hold of Celynn or find out how you can work with Celynn, then you can. So, Celynn, just to finish off, if there was one thing, Celynn, of all of the things that you shared this morning, other than breath, because I know you're going to go to breath, so I'm going to take that, steal that one away from you. If there was one thing other than breath, Celynn, what would it be?
Stay curious. So stay curious and ask questions. I really feel with curiosity and compassion, we can get through this together. Um, yeah.
Brilliant.
And
Thank you.
celebration. Can I add a third C? Curiosity,
Yes, you
compassion,
can.
and celebration.
Yes, you can.
Is
I,
don't wait for big things to celebrate and feel good. You know, if you got up and you had a cup of tea looking out the window and you didn't pick up your phone, in that moment, acknowledge that you did that because you release dopamine, which rewards the reward center in the brain, and it feels good. And we have enough reasons to feel bad and stressed. So the more we can feel good, the better. We change most anyway when we feel good, not bad. So curiosity, compassion, and celebration.
Brilliant. Thank you. And just to finish off on that, I'm curious is if I can change it to 5 things you can taste rather than 5 things, 5 things that
No.
you can. No, I'm banned from that. Brilliant. So just a quick thank you to everybody that's joined us today to work with and listen to Celynn. Every single time that I have a conversation with Celynn, I am inspired to make changes in the way that I am working, the way that I am living my life. That the idea, the concept around and having a conversation with Sally, Ben, and Amy around what play and the overlap in that play, so we can all play together, consciously play together, is another inspiration for me, Celynn. So thank you very much for that. We're getting lots of thank yous, Paul and Emma, which is Phil and Mark and Christy. Lots of thank yous in the chat box, Celynn. So I know you have made a difference to a lot of people this morning. So thank you very much.
Thank
Round of
you.
applause. Thank you. And we will see you all again next time. Thank you. Bye-bye. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Bye.